Welcome everyone to YouTube Masterclass. This one's for Coursera. Coursera showing this video for its Harvard feed, its USC feed, and its Calarts feed. I'm Dr. Sheley. We're discussing film history and film theories and film nuances. And the study of film is one of those studies of aesthetics that we take for granted, that we know how a scene is edited can amplify how a scene is drawing attention to its editing later on in the history of the image. And the image will always be recontextualized from era to era, including silent era to now. And I think part of that nostalgia of the older classical cinema being this like big castle drum of pre-war, like pro-patriotism, and everybody loves the cinema of the silent era, and that it's getting big, and that like Murnau gets this carte blanche for the first time ever in film history on Sunrise. He's given total control of the movie that only happened else with Citizen Kane. And almost Magnificent Ambersons, but there were so many editing disagreements that it wasn't carte blanche. In fact, Orson Welles never got carte blanche again, which is the fact that you can direct the movie however you want. And actually, it's interesting because postmodern auteurs, one lucky benefit of being them, and eccentric as they are, is that you can manifest yourself in many ways before the film image. And, you know, that the image you're using may be from the past, but you're using it in a recontextualized way, and you have all this recontextualization of the cinema by the postmodern auteurs, and they're allowed to, particularly because recycling is important to entertainment, like recycling the theme is important to entertainment. And I didn't quite hit that one on the nail on the head, but they sure did with now Inglourious Bastards. Now, I know my last lecture was kind of confusing because I was saying something about how, like, you know, nowadays there's kind of this like Nazi sympathy, and I don't know if that's true or just like if the right wing claim that there's Nazi sympathy, if the left wing claim there's Nazi sympathy. It's usually a conspiracy theory device to get people's attention focused on some racist media clip that is dragging across radio airwaves and didn't go right, and somebody said somebody's death was more deserved or something, and through the race. And really, I can see how when you get to Django Unchained, we can really say the race card gets played hardcore. The race card gets played by Django Unchained, and really it's playing in all these other movies too. Even Inglourious Bastards has these ethnicities of these different races, you know, the Italians, the Germans, and that. And like the Germans are kind of the ones made fun of in this one. But really what's weird is that some of them were like respectable society types, but I think a lot of them had to do ultimately with why the Holocaust was going on, which was why they were considered monsters in all American film, because D.W. Griffith found the first Jews in Judith Bethulia that would come onto a Hollywood set. And they were also warriors, and they were also poets. And they eventually formed into the Inglourious Bastards in World War I and came back again in World War II. Now, why they're all young in this? Because it's a portrayal of the actual guys that went to go kill Hitler in that battle, and we just tell the whole story of them in these sort of immense clips. And the real disenfranchisement in this is Fassbender. His character is only in a little bit, and he's going to fight with the Inglourious Bastards, and he gets killed right away, and it's a surprise death. And Kurt Russell has one of those in The Hateful Eight, where he is drinking his coffee, and all of a sudden his coffee's poisoned, and he spits blood everywhere and dies. And it happens so fast that, like, when you see it in the replay, because the whole movie is kind of staggered in on itself, but filmed from different angles, The Hateful Eight, not just the whole thing is staggered, so it would, like as a play, it'd be confusing because you'd have to keep going back in time, or keep going a little bit back in time and then go to the next clip that would have come after that whole scene playing in that kind of editing. And that's that real, you know, that creaky boots coming up the creaky cabin, and they're getting closer and closer, and then you've got the gun, you know. It's like that whole motif, that cabin kind of keeps all these guys in one place. The stagecoach ride in Hateful Eight, by the way, is one of the most amazing stagecoach rides, I mean, since the movie Stagecoach. I mean, the movie Stagecoach had it timed perfectly to show what a stagecoach would do if they crossed over those kind of hard sets that they built to the stagecoach, making it look like it was the rugged outdoors. And the stagecoach in Hateful Eight takes it a step further. It takes it to the Telluride Canyon. It takes it to that mountain right up there on the Uncompahgre. It's not far from where I live. I could drive 20 minutes and be there and go walking on that trail. I've actually made movies there. It's a really wild road in Telluride. And the Hateful Eight's really interesting because it opens this race card too, and the Django Unchained and Hateful Eight race card just have to compare themselves with Rio Bravo and the Searchers. And it's ironic that Hateful Eight kind of takes the Searchers' inventory and says, we're going to ride on a stagecoach as far as we can go, and then we're going to stay at a cabin until we defend this girl so that we too can perform the rites of killing her legally, and that is justice being upheld, and that's how Yojimbo gets. I mean, like, the logic of the justice of being upheld and the Hateful Eight is some other thing. They've got to kill this girl. There's some other reason that we never find out that Jennifer Jason Leigh is reprehensible and has to be killed. You know, other than being this sort of, like, Russo's wife character that, like, peels and pulls and nicks at everybody that grinds at her, and she gets beaten up. And I didn't like the female getting violence toward her, even in the end when they're still strangling her and making sure she dies. It seemed cruelty, but then it seemed like she'd done some cruel things, and the movie never covered fully what those cruel things were because they got too cruel, and maybe the censorship was piling up for Tarantino. You know, sometimes he gets it over his head just a little bit with censorship because he'll have this whole movie made, and then censors will want to take piecemeal of it and take pieces out, just like little 2-second clips. They can't, and they start doing that, and they really mess with the frame of the movie, and then you got to re-edit it. He was one of the directors that really noticed the censorship really messes with the heavy editing, and heavy editing has to go back in its place in terms of this kind of touch screen where placing the images the next one as they come in a big feature film, you know, in the post matte kind of painting, where you're painting the film across the screen in these kind of digital layouts that are productive in today's day and date. You know, that George Lucas defined those cameras that look like they're shooting on film already, and they're digital. And the cameras now are even better than that. My camera is better than 4K. I mean, what am I asking on my camera? My camera can't get any better. The picture is what's not that exciting on my camera. It's just me sitting here with my favorite movies talking to you about them. And I appreciate you taking my courses and supporting Masterclass, because without you, we couldn't get it done. And we give all thanks to the filmmakers that we discuss in this for letting us teach this class and enjoying it too, as no mail has come along that anyone's pissed off for anything. Again, for my mistakes on these films, there are few or many, depending on if that's really easy to look at as what I would want to say or what I think is relevantly added to trick you later. Like when Amanda Plummer says, you guys effing move and I'll execute every effing one of you. She says it differently at the end of Pulp Fiction than she does at the beginning, but it's to tie the same scene back together. Now that's really tricky because you're hearing a different audio cue and you're wondering if he's just doing it because he didn't know which one was going to be the ending. But it's not because you can tell that he changed the line for only those of us that are true Tarantinos would be like, you know, he changed the line intentionally so that way there was a continuity error on the splice, so it seemed even more confusing that the movie was told topsy-turvy and backwards and everything else. But you notice a lot more linearity in these films later on. In Django Unchained has all this linearity of him starting out as a bounty hunter and getting saved from the slavery and starting out as a bounty hunter and then going to find his wife and breaks her out, and he loses his German friend in the fray, and that's the only other person fighting for him. So he basically has to take on this whole slave plantation himself, and he guns down every dude that plays because he's a better gunsman. I mean, he's like a blaxploitation character in a spaghetti western trying to be as cool as Django Fett and as badass as Django Fett, and totally succeeding because actually it was Samuel L. Jackson that cut off Django Fett's head in Attack of the Clones in this Coliseum match. That you'd really have to be into Star Wars too. And I remember that when when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood came out, Star Wars Episode 9 was coming out around the same time, and I had to see both. And really, the in-theater experience may be the last great, truly this time the last picture show, maybe the last great thing in cinema history for a while cinema kind of hits a doldrums of too much being made, not enough being released, and then they fall in the trap of all the artists have done their side of the work, and now they're just waiting for kind of the movies to recover. And then I've kind of got this setup thing where, like, I help studios recuperate money they lost in the past. It's because they hired my film at all. So I'd like, let's do something for the studios that hire us. But I think the real interesting thing about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and we'll get to that more next time, because we have 5 lectures left. And who knows what that means for us in terms of the Tarantinoverse, which I haven't even taught, but it's a metaphysical comment on J. Hoberman realizing that everything we see is in the Tarantinoverse, and that Death Proof got a very good review from the Village Voice, and they were saying, go ripped, go twisted, go to Death Proof, or go to Grindhouse. Excuse me, Grindhouse, get ripped, get twisted, let's go to Grindhouse. I mean, that's really true. You would want to see it drunk and stoned. And so to see a movie like that, Drunken Stone, enhances it because that's what it was made for audiences to see. This is postmodern point of view taken a little too severe. It's like, we're going to show you the drunk version, the stoned version, etc. And this can be very funny because it's kind of like having the qualifier be something that makes us all laugh because weed's funny. And whenever they were making Robert De Niro into the total stoner character, I wonder how much pot he really smoked during the making of Jackie Brown, if they really used pot. And that goes back to our question, do they use the real pot in the film? And supposedly no, because it would alter the character's belief. But what if the character had it medicinally prescribed? Like, still that would call for, like, use on the set, but no one really knows if there is such a thing as use on set, because I've heard that David Cronenberg even keeps like a real tight set, and his movies can get messy. Like, I've seen his movies get messy, but it's on a real tight set. Like the Dead Ringers, where they're in that small pavilion trying to do their hack work of surgery, but his hand's all shaking, because he was a Siamese twin, and they're both surgical doctors, gynecologists or something, and it's still a totally close. That's the reason it's a totally closed set. Nobody believed what they were making a movie about and how they were handling it, but it's all professional in cinema. And there are some times where the line is slowly emerged to, and trust me, Tarantino has all kinds of precedents, and his work with film in terms of, Brian De Palma kind of paved the way to like allowing that kind of violence in film up to Scarface, and some of his other movies, like The Untouchables, all the way up to that. Like, there was still violence, and but it was more like a Scorsese kind of panel on Untouchables, or a Spielberg kind of De Palma, who usually like kind of vibrates between the two and kind of sees where to go. But that theory comes in again that all the greats made their great movies and moved on, and now what are they going to do? Or like these producers are just superheroes that fly through the air and then they just land again and movies come back, It's like, how to bring back the process of movie making. We'd have to have dozens in the make. And I think the real, and class, this is a chance for me to actually really say what I'm going to say. And then the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood idea is that it's determinist, that the history is already there, that we can change the history if needs be, and that's what we do. Needs be, we change the history of what happened to the Summer of Love, and this is where it went down with the Summer of Love lives on, with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's not just about the facade of a character, a persona representing you as an artist in your own eccentricities and nuances and all that. And a nuance is a character detail that's noticed, that's usually small, that's like a flick of the wrist or a throw of the cigarette a certain way. And these kind of like motifs of character become the same identifying objective correlatives you see that objectively correlates with the character. Like the tramp always has his hat and his cane. Me, I don't have my cane yet, but I got my hat and my cane. Well, I've got a cane. Okay, let's just say, like, I mean, if I'm old enough to be a professor, which I am, and thank you that I look young if you're saying that, but if I'm old enough to be a professor, I've got all sorts of gadgets and gizmos around here that make things easier on me. And I can't tell you how the condition of shooting at a giant studio, after a giant studio, Ron Howard does that a lot too, and then Tarantino does that a lot, where they go in, they dismantle, they put everything up that they want, they shoot the scene, they get all the props that they need, and they go on to the next house after they've dismantled their own. And I think it's weird that there's always a set to dismantle, even when the last movie was there and dismantled too. I don't quite have an in on the information that, like, maybe there's pre or prior dismantling rights that some movies have, the small sets that they paid a piece of for their movie is what I would guess. But it's like, if the producers could realize what a big money-making expenditure / return of interest movies used to be, even in the era of Harry Potter and Titanic and all that we just went through, where movies just stopped and there weren't being enough made, and now there's not enough being released, and now we don't know if anybody's even interested in film anymore, and now AI is taking over. And this AI thing is weird because all it is plagiarized scenes that have already been filmed somewhere, just strewn together. I mean, Ed Wood can direct better than that. He can put position to the shapes and objects that are more interesting than AI. If you think AI is more interesting, then you know nothing about organic film and how, like, even a paper airship coming at you in Plan 9 is a freaking Star Destroyer. And I know that the paper airplanes of the 60s were a little different. No. I mean, it has nothing to do with that. So he uses paper plates for his UFOs, Ed Wood. Does that make him a bad director? Just because he's working with, like, this cinema povera? And then that's what Plan 9 rips me apart, because they had all this stock footage that cost so much money to get into the film and get the rights to it, everything. And then, like, it turns up being like this, what would the poorest filmmaker make? And it was only because they spent all the church's money, and that they went through a church to get money is cool, because they were just trying to be Largum, right? And such the Ed Wood stories go. And why we gravitate towards the eccentric part of the story, I don't know. Like D.W. Griffith meeting Ed Wood, and like this whole generation of Hollywood had gone by, and that it was the whole new thing with the Glen or Glinda, and that it wasn't such a bad idea at first in the 50s, and then it got kind of touted into this, like, exploitation cinema craze, and all the way up to, like, the 60s with Dementia 13, in the 60s. Those Francis Ford Coppola movies that are like Roger Corman 2, and that they both were kind of interested in the film, but Roger Corman didn't really take credit for those. It was still heralded by Roger Corman, Dementia 13, as this movie that should be made. So you always see this sort of, like, greater mentor mentality going back to Griffith, and then, like, it comes down to John Ford and goes to Hitchcock and Kubrick. Orson Welles, kind of gets this independent director spirit. And then you kind of get through the period of the 60s with, I know Arthur Penn and Sam Peckinpah are very peculiar directors with peculiarities that define them and define their movies. But they're not really up there to me with the names we've mentioned. Like, by the time you get to Kubrick, you're already starting to head out to Scorsese and Spielberg, which is only one step away from Tarantino. And, of course, we all want to see another Spike Lee film, right? We all want to see another Ron Howard and Robert Zemeckis film. These are the last of the living legend of the directors, Paul Thomas Anderson, Darren Aronofsky. They're up there with our previous gen, just dominators of that. They both were, Darren Aronofsky and Paul Thomas Anderson. Wes Anderson, too. But he's got a nuanced peculiarity thing like Arthur Penn, Wes Anderson. So he can make everything coy and general, but that there's usually a selective moment of caring and emotional letdown and emotional cave-in that becomes emotional redemption. In an American film, there's always something being redeemed. I think in all American films, no matter what the film is, even down to the pornography, something is redeemed within the film. And I usually don't count porn in because really, if you look through this Tarantino material, there's not anything pornographic except for maybe the scene in where Spider caught a fly in Pulp Fiction. I'm not sure how they did that, but I'm not going to ask if they used real people, and they probably just said they used real people when asked. I mean, a lot of times they'll tell you how they did a scene in a film just to throw you off on like a DVD or something, even where they're talking about the movie and they're like, "Oh yeah, we picked up a trash can and flipped it upside down, and then we, it's like." I don't know, dude. They're just saying that to throw you as and keep you as a fan quote guessing, and me as like a film professor researching. Like, okay, did they really say this in the last uh, temptation of Jesus Christ? When they were making that, I mean, did they really have certain footage of, for instance, Willem Dafoe smoking a cigarette? And I think if they would have put that in as his last temptation, that would have been one that we could have all understood and been like, go Jesus, smoke it up, dude. You only go around once, but St. Peter's not going to like it. It's like, I don't care about the religious jokes. I mean, the religious jokes don't bother me. And here's some interesting news to all of them following my class and learning from my class. I've misjudged a couple of ideals about cinema and reverse and oppositional thinking, and the oppositional thinking that some films are going through, and then this sheer titillation of a lurid scene that makes me unbrave to say that everyone in the movie wanted it that way. And though I look at things like Showgirls, a movie, and everybody did want it that way, the Paul Verhoeven way was to do it and overdo it and then overdo it some more. And since we're talking about pornography, I mean, there's Hold Me While I'm Naked, and it's a soft core, but it's a famous movie, an art film of the Calarts. So now you're dealing with pornography, and you're like, well, we allowed that, so is the scene in Aaron's challenged movie, The Clockwork Orange, is bad? And I'm like, yeah, it's bad, it's bad. They show what it's like to hurt some lady, and then I found out that there's another version of Clockwork Orange. I'm not just saying this. It was like a released earlier where it was her fault that she got messed with, and she was the one that was originally taunting him in the alley, and that she taunted him and ran away. And then there was all this depressing stuff with this alternate gang they had to beat up for. And then they went back and found her and made it look like it was all this setup, right? But not a setup at the same time, like it was a random choosing of the place they went to, but the original movie showed that it wasn't a random place. And I'm bringing this up on Tarantino's behalf because we can go through times in life and have these humdingers of a favorite film. Like don't look, I'm preaching to the choir. I mean, my favorite film is Birth of a Nation, and it's bad racist. I didn't like the racism in it, but the film was great. It was like the film I taught last semester. It was the only, and if you leave it to another moral of the film is well, the Klansmen were left to get rid of the cattle rustlers ultimately in the end. I don't think the Klansmen were cattle rustlers, and if they were, they'd be a mean machine. But if there were Klansmen going after cattle rustlers, all bets are off, and you can't really diminish the need for someone to stop a cattle rustler. And no, those cattle rustlers were usually off of the cattle barons that were trying to take over the stock of meat that was coming through by the Transatlantic Railroad, or the one that was built in the Iron Horse or whatever to carry meat of cattle. That movie, what is it, Red River, was made about that. And John Wayne and Montgomery Clift kind of take this like Jedi and kind of mentality where John Wayne's the Jedi and Montgomery Clift's learning from him, and then Montgomery Clift later has to take over when John Wayne goes insane. It's the only other movie besides The Searchers where he really goes insane. I mean, in The Cowboys, he kind of goes insane, John Wayne. The John Wayne that Samuel Jackson's doing in Hateful Eight is a little bit different, though, because it's more of a kind of like heady and intellectual John Wayne. It's like the logic deducing. He's deducing who the Hateful Eight are by finding out that they're white guys that would use the N-word in front of the sheriff with a giant blaster. And normally at this time, and normally in movies like this, even Tarantino, if the N-word is mentioned, it's just let go. I mean, when it was mentioned hundreds of times in Django Unchained, everybody got shot. It finally exploded and everybody got shot for saying the N-word that many times that repulsively against them. And then the Hateful Eight, it's like, well, once they've said it, I know they're one of the Hateful Eight because the other guys up here that were supposed to be here aren't racist at all. He was just up here last weekend. And then it's not really placed in Colorado, either of them. There are scenes you can see where they filmed by Telluride, and I just love that the Telluride Film Festival is such the great film festival of all, and that these movies must have played in some cinema that Telluride heard about, because you can just sense that there's this kind of grittiness, this kind of edge, this kind of plastability on their Telluride shoot, like a Telluride shoot is blessed. And the Hateful Eight got that stagecoach so good in the snow, and then they added some digital, and then there's a scene where the horses are panting, and I've never seen really Tarantino confront humane society issues, but the horses were trained to do that. Like in War Horse, that horse was trained to do the work of the soldier that it was relaying to on the battlefield, and it was amazing how a horse could be a soldier at the same time. And not the horse soldiers, the soldiers that are horses. Remember that, and we'll all be okay. Now, the Hateful Eight is different than Django Unchained in the way that the Hateful Eight is told in this kind of brocage of like the stagecoach and then the cabin, and then the flashback to the earlier thing that happened at the cabin on down to the Reservoir Dogs, then there were none effect, done like a theatrical play once gotten to the cabin, that there are ecstatic edits and ecstatic motions to the Hateful Eight are only to its ability to film so much at once, but that the sturdy takes are longer, especially even stagecoach traveling. The sturdy long takes are longer than your average Hollywood film in the Hateful Eight. The Hateful Eight has Samuel L. Jackson really at the top of his game. It really may be his best movie. I don't know. It seems to me like there was no other part made for him. It seems like he got so outcasted by doing that part in Django Unchained that everyone was offended by it. Everyone thought he was really a sellout when he was in that role, and he kind of took it as the martyr in that film because he was the only one offensive enough to play that role and say, you know what, I can do this offensively while still hanging it out as this guy that's trying to get ahead, that is black and tricking everybody into think that he's just following the headmaster, or really he was following the headmaster, and that was just his way of thinking, the character, I mean. But that Samuel L. Jackson went from Stephen Fetchit to John Wayne. It was a real big turnaround, and I think that just stands a test to his acting ability and about how through all these different Tarantino films, he of all people kind of makes this, background that he fades into like a cheetah, or like one of those chameleons. It's like a chameleon that he can stand and stare at something long enough and become it. Isn't really what I'm saying, but that he's a chameleon and that he can shapeshift into so many different dimensions. That the work from Django Unchained to Hateful Eight was so big of a difference that like his chameleon abilities of shapeshifting were definitely ready for another movie. And whether they filmed the two movies at once, probably did. That would have been easier to do, and that they probably could have got the cabin scenes in between all of the other scenes they had, the piecemeal that they had to put together on, from Mississippi on and Django Unchained. And I like how the title gets big and tries references like silent films and tries references like Civil War epics. I like how Inglourious Bastards is like one of those war movies where it's like Casino Royale, we're off to kill the Hitler, the wonderful Hitler of Oz. No, that's not really a real song, but I'm just saying, like, they used to make that out of the News on the March in theaters. They're like, well, just today, film stars have left to give Germany their walking papers. Here is John Ford giving Germany its walking papers. And I know I tell these war stories all the time. And that Tarantino's movies have kind of stayed out of the war, other than Inglourious Basterds. It's a real kick to the war, and that he's got different kinds of action adventures in his collection, and that the adventure is told and the action is shown, and the eroticism determined by the machismo being equally high of a entertainment point. That's where we get with Tarantino's films, is that he's entrenched us with all of these supplies of good visuals to look at, all in a sight and sound reel. It's like to say, hey, these movies are real. That's why I only made 10 of them, because I wanted to make these the realest I could and be the ones they're remembered for, to be all of them. And so far, everyone we've discussed, from Reservoir Dogs to The Hateful Eight to the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they're all remembered as what they are. Some are blaxploitation. Inglourious Basterds is a war film. We won't even have time to go through all of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but there's some film theory behind that may straighten out that really confusing ending that's like one of those Citizen Kane endings that you just saw it, you saw it at the beginning, and you didn't know how you'd react to the new information that was not on your mind when you thought you'd see something else, and it's an optical illusion in the end. And that's what they use, kind of an optical illusion, to show that Kurt Russell's drinking poison in this aestheticized shot that shows from below the poison going in by his bottle and going into the coffee. He takes a sip and then he just starts spitting blood, and it's like this trauma, like Herschel Gordon Lewis film, when the chick's getting her teeth knocked out and the Hateful Eight are getting all gunned down, and he's blowing all their heads off down to the last racist. And he doesn't even care if they're racist or not. He's just seeing if they'll say the N-word around him, because like the people he was expecting would never use that word. And that's why he's knowing these guys are there by mistake, is because they're using the N-word. Here we go, race card. Okay, wait a minute. So you're saying that you went from Step and Fetch It, who all men have to call you N-word, even people that never use the word have to call you that, because you're just selling out all the blacks in the plantation just so you can have a nice bed to sleep on. Well, that may be less selfish than you think. It may be that he's being controlled to do that, or like the house image of the N-word, that Spike Lee explains, like maybe he was willing to do that. But in Django Unchained, he becomes the anti-hero of the movie when he's dousing, Jamie Foxx does, excuse me, Django, when he douses the plantation, he becomes a bigger hero, and that just sort of diminishes this sort of Step and Fetch It character into nothing. But whether it's into nothing, he didn't shoot him, at least, so he must have wanted him alive, or at least thought it'll be okay for him to be alive. And if that guy is such a sellout, was he really going to tell anyone that Django was there? Because it looked like Django was about to ride on to victory, and maybe he didn't see him, and that's why he didn't kill him. But he saw some of those cowboys coming in pretty much from afar, so he gunned them down when he saw them. And the Samuel L. Jackson character being so prompted upon that inward reflex in Django Unchained to come back as the freaking Jedi of Jedis makes a dude suck him in the middle of winter. It's the most offensive scene in film history. It was like the Weinstein's last joke on the world or something by using that footage, and they joked it on them because they said, man, he could use one to heat it up so it doesn't die. It would have lost all feeling to it if you'd have been out in the snow that long. Thanks, man, for letting me use your head as getting head. And you're like, dude, I mean, it's intense. It comes towards the middle of the movie, and they're telling stories, and everybody's got a story, and then finally Samuel L. Jackson kind of reels back and tells his story, and it's that freaking decadent. I mean, I think it's a good one because it's another one of those moments like in Pulp Fiction where something so crazy happens so fast that you can't really hold on to the images you see like you may want to circumscribe what you're seeing. And then it's like that, so you watch it again, the movie again, you see it from a different angle, because these are controlled by a Hollywood director, so they know what each viewing, the third, the fourth viewing is going to give you a different perspective. That some movies change just by sitting there in their own film canisters by making scenes extra long or extra short is a problem with Pulp Fiction. That video does the same thing. If left long and wide, it'll adapt to a couple extra frames automatically just to get you batched out on the right code. Am I wrong? Their movies can change size. With censorship, heck, they change editing. We should just let the censorship guys be the editors. You know how bad a movie would be if we gave it back to Hollywood? If Hollywood gave it back to the White House for the president to direct it. I mean, Obama could have made good movies. Trump could have probably made good movies. I'm not saying the directors wouldn't have, that the presidents wouldn't suffice as directors, but they're good at their job. Directors are good at their job. I can't give away all the mystery of both jobs and why I'd prefer one over the other. Personally, directing's too hard for me, but I'm still a director. So where does that put me? It's too hard for me, but I'm still a director, so I still direct. But I'm not saying anything against the quality of the nature of my work and how it's trying to reflect on Quentin Tarantino, for instance, and all the pot use. And Jackie Brown had always inspired me in coughing until your capillaries open. I had never known that about weed until I saw the movie, and I remembered hearing someone kind of quote that from High Times, but that was about it. And the thing that's pushed you to the edge, genius, is a lot of these, even with their censorship edits, there's strange things left in to cover that up. And the digitized machinations of the AI, of the computers which were running about this time, and about this time, the Weinsteins were found out to be guilty of thousands of crimes, and they had to go to prison and get the death penalty and everything. They're producers for all those years. And really, that meant they must not have been nosy producers, because no one nosed into their territory until the end and almost got hurt. Around the Hateful Eight time, I hate to say it, and set up the movie for this Polanski, Macbeth type chain reaction, And yet the Weinsteins, I don't want to talk about them much as having a symbolism over the movie, but that they could produce a movie like The English Patient after producing a movie like Pulp Fiction. There's something up with a studio that gives all the money that the artist needs to the artist and practically carte blanches them at Miramax as an independent filmmaker. But then it turns out their deeds against humanity were too intense to take, even for the news to talk about, so they were dished out of cinema, as other things have been censored by the course of cinema all the way, and that I'm surprised they didn't have to make re-edits of all these films to take away the things that they added or took away to the film, because things would need changed. If they still have their name on the license of the film, that's going to have to change. Maybe it'll go to the Weinstein Company. Maybe not all of the Weinsteins are evil. It's hard to find a family of full evil unless you're the Crowleys of the Weinsteins, right? I don't know where else you'd find a family of full evil. And I'm not even going to talk about a South Park joke on that, because I think it's pretty weird how, Matt Damon's an awesome actor, right? We can all agree that, Matt Damon's an awesome actor. I was talking about on film criticism. But sometimes people make jokes with their kids about Matt Damon's name and something, and I'm like, it's the little things. No wonder these actors get, worried that they're not liked in movies. What if Matt Damon was working his day job at the shop, at the Chevy shop or whatever, and heard on the radio that they just didn't get his performance? Normally he's good, but this time they didn't get it. And I'm like, dude, he's a professional Hollywood movie star, actor. He doesn't need your acting coaching. He doesn't need your approval either, but you better fucking give him his approval, because he's doing the hardest work of all, and that's to be an actor in a film. And let me explain this a little bit. When you're in a film and given dialogue, and let's say it's Django Unchained, you have all these camera setups that are exterior and all these camera setups that are interior around the same set that you've built, say it's a plantation. And then the set clears itself, so you have all these cameras set up on the set so you can get all the intentional bits and pieces of the movie, the 3-second shots that go cabling together through a film. And I think Armageddon, the movie, really changed that, even as Tarantino did, with shorter clips and more of them. Shorter clips and more of them, was of the Armageddon. That came around The Rock, shorter clips and more clips than you had before. So this is going to mean more setups, more curios with how to linger with time for 3 seconds to change over to the next 3 seconds. Filming it in order is outrageously impossible with the needs of the outdoor shots and the indoor shots. Then the weather won't matter once we're indoors. And I think Tarantino just thinks of all this ahead of time. And he goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lease out like 7 sound stages and go make a movie until they kick me out. And they've kicked him out like they kicked him out on Jackie Brown. They kicked him out on Kill Bill, where he was still in the edit bay, still making Kill Bill Part 2, and hadn't released Kill Bill Part 1, and wasn't done with even Part 1, and had to go back and add some scenes. And then he added this whole like kind of epilogue that bridged the 2 movies, and it was like, when she sees me, she will want her revenge, Michael Madsen says. It's this beautiful setup of the next coming part. And, that's one thing we keep overlooking is the music. And the music's been composed by film composers as well as these are like rock and roll hits, like Rusty Cage by Johnny Cash plays in Django Unchained when he's stuck in a rusty cage. He's like a slave stuck in a rusty cage. And now we know where the term rusty cage comes from. And we know that Tarantino isn't fully ready to confess that he's only telling the story from Django's perspective, because we do see some things that are stereotypical about some of his prisoner mates, and he uses them to be good guys anyway. But didn't you notice they were kind of like Dopey the Dwarf? Like they were, yeah. I mean, they were like the guys. Well, I won't say it, but that they were made to make an act of it and ham it up. And then Leonardo DiCaprio's villain was totally hammed up, and you could laugh at some of the dialogue. It was Kubrickian. Like the way the Full Metal Jacket was just coming out with its random slurs, just to slur the slur. And it just gets worse. It's like a long time rant of like this, Tourette syndrome coming out of Leonardo DiCaprio. And he's getting so into the role, and these actors get so into their role, and then they ask you psychologically, is it good that they got so into their role? And I think, well, I hope not, because then that means Leonardo DiCaprio, who used to be non-racist, maybe, I don't know, theoretically, but maybe he's bringing out his racism now. But what kind of makes me don't think he is a racist is because he's always after the Nazis in his show on TV, where he's like, die, you Nazi bastards, die, and he shoots them all with the flamethrower. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he's making that movie. And yeah, I don't think that everything that Tarantino's directing is according to this like linear mythology that's just all going to play out and all the pieces will fall in straight. More like it's going to make room for one movie to connect to the next, to the next, to the next. The Vega brothers being in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and here Samuel L. Jackson is still the connection between all these movies, except for Grindhouse, maybe, which it still seems like, and Inglourious Basterds, which it still seems like has his presence, and that he's not present in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is only, and he does do a voice in that, but it is only because they made it a deal to not have any black people in that, so they didn't confuse people about what the movie was about, because at first it was going to have this big race card to it. It was going to be this black director trying to get things done in Hollywood. And it always starts that way, as like this noble primer guide to how we're going to do things in Hollywood and how we're going to leave him in Hollywood. But my favorite thing about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that like 5 minutes after he hits the stardom of his career, he's already a has-been. He's like, I'm a has-been. Right after he has success, out the window success. Like, he had all these, like blockbusters coming out. But one thing I'm noticing about these movies is that I'm naming or going through or somewhere, we're kind of still explaining The Hateful Eight and Django Unchained and moving on to the last film we have to discuss with Tarantino, and then we'll kind of go back through and summarize before the class is over. But I'm telling you, after this one, there's really only 4 more classes, and we'll only meet 4 more times. Once to discuss the rest of these westerns, and one more time to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. For I think I can cover that in one lecture, but it might take a couple because there's certain things about The Great Escape being pastiched in by AI is already a wonder that you can do that in postmodernism. Like, you can pastiche, like, look at Forrest Gump and all the people he meets. You can pastiche in scenes from other movies to make them seem like you're in your movie. They've been doing that since Forrest Gump, and that's the ultimate in postmodern pastiche, is when you just drive it right out of the hologram that is that shell of imagery and boister it onto your own canister of digital filmmaking. Like, would Ed Wood have had any problem as a filmmaker today? Probably not, because he probably would have designed an amazing, like, Leonard Glinda AI that would have taken us all to the future of film in one single step. But this is only because he's eccentric and makes little plates into UFOs. And some of that was saying, I like Tim Burton's edge of irony on Ed Wood, and I only bring up Ed Wood because I brought up Herschel Gordon Lewis and these like sleaze meisters of exploitation, and how there's always this edge of exploitation in these films, especially like Hateful Eight and Herschel Gordon Lewis. And there's this sort of like blood entrenching, and there's germs on the mattress, there's blood on the mattress, there's blood on the walls. They're holding her back to kill her, and she's still not dying. She's so hard to kill that her whole gang goes down by Samuel L. Jackson's gun as they say the N-word after he gets one guy to, after telling that story where he gave the white guy the white guy gave him a blowjob because he forced him to, and that was a real sensitive scene to everybody. They were like, "Ew, it's in secret, man," and I'm like, that was Tarantino's throwback to, I'm still the edgiest, I'm still the meanest, and I'm still the craziest of all the directors. So you guys can back off, or this same thing will happen to you. It's probably happening to the Weinsteins right now, and I'm so glad to have their money now. And Robert Rodriguez, here's a little bit for you. Let's go back to the Grindhouse 2 decision before I make Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's like all of it's changing around, and Hollywood's changing. And I think with the loss of the Weinsteins in Hollywood, it was a programming loss because they were so in charge of so many programming of films. Maybe they were tyrants, evil people, but they always programmed the films, and they let the filmmaker pretty much have free reign over their film. If they were the director of the film, they had pretty much free reign at a Miramax picture, which is what Disney was proud of. And now is like hoisting that to pieces, going, well, we got all these good movies out of it. Can't it go down as just they did some gangster stuff and disappeared? And I'm like, I don't even care if it goes down at all. All I know is there's something strange about a film factory that's being run by total people that are totally being evil, but yet they're totally giving all the money they can to the artists. The actors and the director get to make the film however they want, and that's like getting all the money anyway. Because all the money is what you use to make it with. And if you're told you can make it with anything you want, wouldn't that be like an unlimited budget and unlimited time? Kubrick said time and budget were the only things that limited him on Barry Lyndon, and that by very little. So you got to think, if he was coming out of Clockwork Orange going, I really may have messed up my career permanently after Lolita and Clockwork Orange and all that, but like he's like, you know what, I'm gonna do it even wilder and crazier, and it's gonna work out. I want to do it even wilder and crazier, and it'll work out. And with Barry Lyndon and The Shining and Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, we have 4 films that are very much better and very much wilder and crazier and go out with way more of a bang. And the Eyes Wide Shut thing reminds me of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's like, well, once we've seen the wizard in the back room projecting his head onto a giant projector, then we've seen the wizard dethroned almost, because now we don't believe in his magic. We just think he's using a projector. And then we find out the projector is magic, and we're back in scenes that may or may not be in Wizard of Oz still. And that there are so many versions of that movie that I can't hold it as constraint of being the most perfect movie, because I don't think I've seen its perfect edit. There's always something slightly egregious about a cat and a chick that shows up at the end of that movie that just scares Judy Garland on Toto back into Oz. And does Toto stay in Oz, or is Toto at the dream sequence? And I think Toto's at the dream sequence, so it must have jumped back on. Toto must have done a giant jump, ran up the side of a building, jumped off into the balloon in a scene we didn't see. That wasn't even cleared up in the Franco version. Thank you, everyone. That was Masterclass. We're going to talk more about Tarantino as auteur. We're going to look distinctly at his auteur style, defined as the action-adventure director that gives us the edge, gives us the entertainment, and does it in an artistic way. In his artistic way, he uses enamoring close-ups, enamoring establishing shots, and always arouse stories and dialogue in between that includes everything from pop culture to meta-narratives told out of sequence, to the neo-noir gangster film being perfected in all of these definitions I have used. That's the auteur style of Quentin Tarantino. And there's more to it. There's a lot more to it. We've discussed more. So don't lose that feeling, because he's one of those directors that'll give you a feeling that he's really there when you're watching a movie. You really can feel his presence when you watch these movies. And I don't know him. I don't know him well. I don't know personally him, but I sit there and you can feel his presence in his movies, the way you could Alfred Hitchcock. I'm not kidding you. All right, next time. See you next time.